Okay, the time is now 6:30. I'd like to call the Board of Finance meeting to order. Would you all please join us in the pledge? Pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, roll call. Ted Domain. Here. Travis Irons. Here. Don Cavell is excused absence. Kim Medlin.
Here.
Tom Sinkowitz. Gary Stallborn.
Here.
Keith Shealy. Here. And Matt Rader. Here. Matt, for the record, you have voting rights tonight in the place of Don. Before moving forward on the agenda, I would like to entertain a motion to add under new business, item G would be to discuss and act upon proposal to have Realtor be given permission to promote and sell the remaining iPark lots, since that is needed approval from the Board of Finance to allow for a reduction of the sales price being commissioned. So I'd like to have that added. Okay. Motion and a second. Any other discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries to add item G. All right, next item, acceptance of the minutes from the November 20th, 2019 meeting. Minutes were distributed to the members. Any comments, questions?
I'll take this opportunity to thank the voting members at last month's meeting for appointing me to the Board of Finance. I was not present for that meeting, but thank you.
Thank you for your amendment.
I move the meeting minutes be accepted as presented.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of accepting the minutes from November 20th, 2019 meeting, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
All abstain.
Abstentions? Okay, one abstention. Motion carries. All right, first item under new business is to discuss and act upon $64,000 ECS cut by the state. So, for those of you who might remember back in September at our Board of Finance meeting, Ken had of course given us a summary as well as a handout back then explaining some possible options of how the Board of Finance could maybe handle this, just suggestions of what we could consider. The question that was before the board then, which is still before the board now, is to determine if the town appropriation to the Plainfield schools for fiscal year 19 and 20 of $35,930,347 should be sustained or reduced by the $64,000. There were three recommendations that Ken had given us that we could consider. Again, it doesn't mean that we need to go with either one of them, but the ones that he had recommended as possibility were require the Board of Ed to reduce its fiscal year 20 budget by $64,000 and put the matter of the reduction to a vote of the taxpayers. I will mention just on that, I had discussed this with Kevin, and Kevin, as I understood, that is not required if we ended up going that route to have a public meeting. To do that, okay. So keep in mind that that was, again, originally said, but has since been corrected. The other options were to allow the fiscal year 20 budget to remain as the taxpayers voted on June 3rd, 2019, or require that the Board of Ed to underexpend the fiscal year 20 budget by $64,000 for return to the town. So I invited our Board of Ed chair, who could not make it this evening, but we also have our business manager and our superintendent, so I'd like to recognize our superintendent to give us any other information pertaining to this. I see something.
So if you still have the documentation, did they all receive that?
Yeah,
And,
that was one of
this
the
is just copies so that the public, if they choose to follow, will have it. Just the reiteration of the fact that we understood from last year when ECS had not been formally adopted by the legislature, it could be as much as $114,000. The Board of Finance in good faith said, well, we're going to go forward. You kept the mill rate to what it needed to be, and you agreed to cut $50,000 from the request and that if in fact the ECS came in lower, we had to make a decision whether the 64, the balance of 50,000 from 114, which is the actual cut of ECS, would have to be dealt with. Knowing that that was a possibility, we were asked to identify where that money would come from. And back in October, from the letter that I provided you a copy with, the board took that under advisement and we showed them 3 numbers that are very real. We did have 2 administrators leave the district, Mr. Worth and Jeannie Riley, Mrs. Riley. And the gap in their time left $11,000. That money is real. It's been reduced in our projection. We did not know what to project for LED savings because we didn't know when it would be installed and when it would kick in. And actually, the solar started in November, as they projected, middle of November. That's a good thing. It happened. So we do expect to have savings in energy costs. And then we had some fixed costs by not having a lot of layoffs and because, and again, Ron is here, you're more than welcome to ask him directly. I never want to overshadow him. He prepares me to prepare for you. But what happened was, for the past years prior, there was an assessment of how much the town paid in workers' comp and how much the school district paid. We are a very large school system, 600 employees. The town is much smaller. But when they looked at the actual costs, the accrual of cost for workers' comp, they reestablished what the share of cost would be. And this year it was an adjusted cost, so we pay a little less to the savings of about $30,000 or just about $35,000, which is less than we paid last year only because the cut was different. Those are 3 real numbers. If you choose to say that $64,000 should be cut from the appropriation, that's where those numbers would be cut. That doesn't mean there aren't other either savings in a person who took a maternity leave, they're going to take an unpaid leave. That doesn't mean there'll be, as we know, new costs for special ed. But those are things that the board always has to account for. They have the ability to make transfers between line items as long as the bottom line doesn't change. And if it happens that special ed actually costs so much more, there is that special ed excess aid that we have the ability to access. So we wanted to just say to you, whatever your decision is and you feel that you need to do, we do have the targeted numbers. Those numbers are being held, that those numbers have not fluctuated. While there are other changes, that's the duty we have as a school system always, to balance any other changes that happen. But those are legitimate reductions to projections, and those are legitimate places to cut costs. We didn't want you to feel a burden like if we did this, would we hurt a child? That's not where the child gets hurt if you decide to make that change. So I want you to know, again, in the initial discussions with the chair, I said I would look into the MBR, and we contacted the state. Kevin Chambers is the person who related to us. He's the one who gave us that letter that said we were out of compliance. Kevin Chambers, and then he said we were in compliance with the action we took. So I wrote to him and I said, if they cut 64,000, is that going to be a crisis? Absolutely not. We're well within the MBR, so if you make the cut, it is not a crisis for the state to say you're out of compliance. I know the charter is somewhat silent on what happens when you're not asking for more than 50,000. The last 2 practices that was taken was that whenever there was a change to the appropriation, somehow there was a meeting that does it. I don't know what the general statutes are. I know your charter is silent on it. I don't know what you need to do if you change the appropriation, because if the town votes in an appropriation, if it's the Board of Finance, if it's the Board of Selectmen, but somewhere there has to be a legal statement that says the new appropriation is. I don't know if it's just a vote, or if it's a selectman action, or if it's just a simple town meeting that they say we are going to approve it. Like when we made the change at the end of the year, it was a $500,000 change, but it was no change to the taxpayer, and then we never used it. So, but we went to a vote, our town vote, and it was done. So please don't consider that an impediment. It isn't. I just think it's a very simple process step, whatever you choose to do. And please know that when you make a decision, if you vote the recommendation to cut, and the Board of Selectmen advises, the board will take this up at their January meeting, and then they will reconcile the budget to the new appropriation. So there's 3 steps. You need to take an action. If you do, the selectman has to give us a direction from the town, whether that's the selectmen, Board of Selectmen, or whether it's town, we don't care, whatever you do. And then the Board of Education's obligation is to then reconcile so that you know that the new bottom line is $64,000 less than where we took the cuts from. 3 steps, it'll be done. So, as we said, pretty much we understood that it could be a possibility. The option is yours. If you have questions, or if you have questions in terms of finance, and Mr. Lucy's here, we're happy to answer anything.
And quick question.
Yeah.
On the solar estimate, that's for the year?
Yes.
How many buildings you have with panels?
Only 2.
2?
Yeah.
There's no more going on online or anything?
Well, there's 3 other buildings, but 2 of them are connected, PMS and PCS, and that was being done by Forefront, as was the high school. They're the largest of all the buildings,
Right.
but they never made it within the time frame. They were gonna have to be doing that construction while kids were in the building. So those 3 buildings are not done. We do believe that because Moosup is a totally electric school, so, it's a draw. And Shepherd Hill has had some numbers. We couldn't guess, because we didn't know, as you knew back then, we didn't know if it would be November, December, January, when they would kick in. We were given an estimate of the savings we could make, $3,000 to $5,000 a month. You figure if you do 5 months, it could be 6 months. So we don't have a month yet. We don't even have a month to tell you.
It just came in.
I mean, this is what,
It just came in.
the first bill came in the door. So we don't have an ability to tell you how significant it is. But we believe between the solar and LED. Plus the answer is, we would do this, and if it isn't realized, the board's obligation is to find another place for that money. We just wanted to give you very legitimate places. So we didn't cut a sport, we didn't cut a lake bus, we didn't cut anything. We just cut costs that we knew we had savings in.
So the other buildings will be online for next budget year?
And the good news was we got a completion date by August before school starts, which would mean almost identically, that's when Earthlight completed theirs. It takes about 2 months to verify, initiate, and then make sure that the first bill happens. That's in November. So if it's done by the end of August, September, and October, they would do all the checks. In November it would happen. We'd get about 8 months of savings in the 2 largest of 12 buildings. So we're looking at some good money that will help.
Ken, had this been on a previous Board of Ed agenda as far as discussing that possibility of the 64, like where it would come from? Had that been discussed with the Board of Ed?
You have the Board of Education, that was a memo that went to them, that went right to the board, and they did take the action on this to support this. And the reason was not to go before the Board of Finance in order to say they didn't know.
Yeah.
So we limited it to things that we knew would not affect student. Yes.
That was the October meeting, yeah, and then of course you said if we were, whatever we would go with then would be discussed at the January.
Right, they have to formally take, because we don't cut anything until we know that it's a decision that's been made by the town. Yes. Good.
Okay. Questions, discussion from the board members?
Well, it looks like the only variable figure of these 3 listed would be the solar LED, only because that was incorporated into the original budget draft. So that number could end up being a little more, a little less. But the other 2 looking rather fixed. The workman's comp is a realized figure at this point.
Yes.
That's fixed in at
Yes.
35. So then by statute, the school budget at least would be reduced by what the ECS reduction was going into this current budget year, the $114,000. So that would change the appropriation. That would not violate your NVR, would set the NVR at the figure passed at the budget less 64, so. I don't think we'd be running into any issues with that reduction. And I'll address a question to Mr. Lucy or Mr. DePietro. Are we anticipating, and I don't have the state budget info at hand, but are you aware of what the ECS reduction for the next fiscal year is?
It's identical.
It's
They did a 2-year
$114,000
budget, it's $114,000
in each
each
fiscal
year. Again, we have a short session, but we're arguing why they would cut a district with a rising poverty 2 years in a row. We're still not at where we were 3 years ago in ECS. We're down below the state's It's a little bit crazy.
But as the biennial budget was passed.
Biennial was
it's
114, 114.
214,000 cuts.
Okay, correct. That's correct.
Yeah, I agree, Matt, as far as taking those items into consideration, but also knowing that, between Ken and Ron, I mean, it's been discussed, know where, we've got an idea where it would come from and how it would not, it's something that they could take on. I personally would be for the cut. Any other questions or discussion?
No, I agree with the cut.
Okay, if not, then could entertain a motion, take action.
I'll move that we reduce the school budget appropriation by $64,000, equal to the reduction in ECS.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries to reduce by 64,000.
Mr. Seconds.
Yes.
If I may?
Yep.
So first of all, absolutely we support your decision, it's not even a question. There's a piece that, I'll try to look in for you. I don't question this charter. There's something in MBR that says a town may not reduce its appropriation once it's established. And then it clearly says in the next line, unless there is a reduction to ECS. And then there's, the third line says, and so therefore you have to report it to the state. I think there's a step that we might have to tell the state that we did it, because it's something in the MBR legislation. Again,
Well, Ron, could you do that similarly to how you did when, when we got the notice and obviously you were communicating back and forth with the Department of Education? You were telling them, explain the circumstances as far as how we got here, what we did. Could you also explain this action that we were taking? I mean, would that, or write it formally, would that suffice?
Yeah, I think we could, sure.
Because you already confirmed it with them that we could be doing it.
that's what I said. We've done this so well. You guys said from the beginning, if it happens, we'd like to consider it. We agreed. We gave you the number back in October. This is all above board. This is great. I hate when all of a sudden the state says, no one told us or something, like we missed a step.
Yeah.
So I've been just anxious over trying to make sure that we don't have, because in the MBR, they start off and say, what was your original appropriation, what was your final one? And there's a question, where'd that come from? So I just want to make sure if the state expected it, we'll just tell them that it's there. We're not arguing it, we're going to support it, and you have the legitimacy. It says if you get an ECS reduction, you can make it. So it's not a question of challenge, it's just a question of making sure we're going to try to do what we can to make sure the town is in good stead and that nobody says, where did that come from?
I mean, I would also be fine too if you also requested, like you did, saying that we were basically, out of the heat of being penalized. Remember how you would ask for that confirmation letter from them?
And they did.
I mean, I don't think we had a question to ask for some type of verification like that.
I'll get the letter, I'll make sure the first selectman has a copy that says this. And if they say do something, we'll do that, but I just wanted you to know that maybe a step that we don't know, because it's not our charter, and it's not that we're not together, we are together. We just don't know the state, because they've been a little weird with MBR and ECS. It's been a new ball game for us. So we'll do our homework to make sure he has the information he needs.
All right, I mean, depending on how long it takes, I mean, if it comes promptly, you could always just, make sure the members, get a copy of it that way.
True. And from the point that you just took this action, it's already it's going to be off our chart, so that number won't be spent. Those monies are already set. We have another 7 months to go. It's not an issue.
Mhm.
So it's just doing paperwork to make sure that everybody's secure. We did this too well. We worked too hard at it. We just want the state to follow along and give us the right sanctions. So
And those follow-ups should probably happen anyway after the Board of Ed votes.
Correct.
Yeah.
Votes to accept this.
Okay,
thank you very much.
I will follow up with you, obviously, at a later time we get to that point and get correspondence. All right, next item is an update on the audit. So the original plan that I had is I wanted to try to get a representative from our audit firm out here to actually give us a direct update of some recommendations, some deficiencies, basically where we stood as of today. That ended up not being possible because the reality is, I mean, this is a crazy time of year for auditors. having the December 31st date fastly approaching. So I had a feeling that they probably weren't going to be able to send somebody out, which was the case. So I'm going to ask Ron in just a second to give us an update, because he's of course been in back and forth communications with them regularly. But the plan I do still have is, because we know we're not going to be ready by January like we usually had been in the past, like we were this past year, we're ready by early January, early to mid-January. That is not looking like going to be the case, so what I'm going to be requesting is for a representative to come see us in January. That will probably be a special meeting, because I'm going to basically work it around their schedule and trying to be accommodating to them to have a representative out to us. But I would like, especially at that point, at January, because we're talking about extension time, so to me it's pretty important to know, what's the future looking like as far as just timing, official completion. And that also is going to tell us quite a bit too, because whatever that end date is, when the audit is complete, then our clock officially then starts for needing to then schedule a completely separate meeting. So keep in mind, these are not the same meeting. The first meeting, special meeting I'm talking about, was to just have the auditor give an update. The second special meeting, which would probably not be till sometime in February, hopefully in February, would be to actually have the official presentation of the audit when it's completed. So they would come back out, give a presentation. They usually give us a packet with all the findings, go over it, answer our questions directly, and then we would look into possibly accepting or denying the audit as it is presented at that meeting. Then from that point, the next step is working with, of course, Kevin. After we officially approve the audit, then we would wait to see when would the next meeting be, the annual meeting, basically a continuation of the annual meeting, since that couldn't happen. Even if there was a majority, a quorum at the meeting, it still would have been able to happen because we didn't have it ready. So at some point down the road, there is going to be an annual meeting to approve the audit, and of course all the narrative. So that's kind of the timeline. We just don't know all the exact dates on that.
At this point, it looks like it's pushing right the start of budget season, right?
Yes, I was
That might
thinking
be
about
some
it.
information that's worth knowing as the budgets are being built.
Yeah.
It's not uncommon to have a file an extension. In our case, we're going to have to file another extension. We're going to have to probably push this until the end of February just to cut to the chase. Right now, sorry.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
But, this is not uncommon to operate in such a manner. We have projections to work off of at the beginning of the budget season, and it will be completed by the end of the budget season. So not all is lost in terms of time and figuring out what you need for the next year. And you can always base on what revenue you're collecting to determine what you're going to be able to expend. So, your concern is valid, and I understand where you're coming from, but don't worry, this is, I wouldn't say standard operating procedure, but it's normal to have this type of situation in the municipality, especially when you changed executive office leadership in the way we have over the last year, in addition to the change in audit firm. That being said, this audit firm has noticed a lot of things that the previous audit firm hadn't. There are a couple of things that they probably should have picked up in the past that they haven't, but going forward, it's good to know in terms of making sure that our practices are in place, our credit rating isn't affected by the practices we have in place, and making sure that everything is operating in an efficient manner, so that people understand exactly what is budgeted, what is expensed, what revenue is collected, and so on and so forth. So to give you an idea, I don't want to just give you a vague answer as to what some of the issues are that the audit firm has noticed. One is the internal control and distribution of duties that we have within the Department of Finance. If I get too into the weeds in terms of accounting knowledge, I apologize. Feel free to stop me and ask me to explain it. I'm more than happy to do it. But if I'm making a transfer from one bank account to another electronically, that transfer should not also be recording that transfer as a journal entry. That's a poor practice, and that's been standard operating procedure in Plainfield for a long time. So what we want to do is make sure we close that wound, put a bandage on it, and make sure it's properly administered going forward. Now, the audit firm has noticed that, and it's one of the many things that they're picking up on in terms of our practices. But it's a good thing that we have them in here to make sure it's rectified, because if that is in the audit report year after year, it doesn't matter what our fund balance is, our credit rating will drop. Those are things to be concerned with. There are a number of other things that we could address, and I could give you examples of, but I think it's best to let the audit firm come in here next month, and they will, to give you a full description of how they plan on proceeding and why we need another extension. Because this all ties into why there will be another extension required.
How many extensions have we filed for already?
Just one. And you have to, and I know there was a little bit of a conversation last month about whether or not there's a penalty associated. There is a penalty associated, only if you fail to file an extension. There is no penalty for filing an extension. Just to be clear, I know there was some concern about that, but I just wanted to, you know, understandable.
What was the state deadline for filing?
The,
Or for having the audit report ready for
which deadline? Filing the extension or having
having the finished product of the report of the audit?
So the standard state deadline is December 31st. In order to file the extension, you have to file it in the previous month. So we had until the end of November to file an extension to have the audit ready by December 31st. I'm sorry, January 31st. So now we have to file in this month to make sure that the audit can be extended to the end of February.
And does that always fall to the last calendar day? Of the
Yes.
fo- of the
Yes.
following month? Maybe get lucky with
Every day counts.
That's right.
But, yeah, I mean, this is why you're supposed to change audit firms, to get a different perspective, to understand that some audit firms may miss things that other firms pick up. So going forward, it should be a practice of ours to change it. It's not every 4 years. So,
How long did we have the previous firm?
7 years? So, again, it's a good thing going forward. And I think that's the best perspective to take.
Okay, any questions on updating of the audit?
I'm just curious, I don't know where we would direct this question, but were there any notices or communications about changing auditing firms at any point during the 7-year run of the previous firm? 'Cause that's fairly standard practice to be changing that out every 2 to 3 years in multiple sectors, from private sector to public sector.
I think it's important to note how I was notified we were changing audit firms. And shortly after coming in within the first month of me being here, the audit firm called me up and told me that they weren't capable of handling our town because of they were being spread thin. So we most likely would have kept the audit firm if they hadn't pulled out on us. I did recommend at the time to the first selectman that it was important to change audit firms for that very reason. But again, you know, it's like anything. Sometimes it's people get comfortable with the ways, and if we have a large fund balance, people tend not to look into certain areas that they might otherwise have. So I'm just, you know.
I'm sure you can appreciate the dangers of comfort with accounting when it comes to an audit.
Yes,
So,
yes. It's more, if you think the budget season's stressful, you have no idea what does the audit does to the accounting or the fund finance.
maybe that's something that ends up on charter revision.
Why not?
Okay, any other comments or questions? No? All right. Moving on to item C. Update on Highway Department garage roof. So for those of you present at our last Board of Finance meeting, you might remember that point being raised about what is the status on the Highway Department garage roof, because remembering back to the budget season, we had discussed it in great length as far as it being a safety concern. The money got approved, of course, for it, but there's been delayed action in actually making it happen. So I have been in communication with our first selectman, who I know has been working on it, and definitely trying to expedite it because we're this far along in the year and not having gotten it done. So I'd like to recognize him to give us an update.
Good evening, I just wanted to give you the most recent, which was Kyle had received the final specs to put it out to pre-bid. We're doing a pre-bid on December 30th, and then 1 week later we'll go out to bid. So we hope that we included that part of it, and then the next part would obviously be working with whoever wins the bid to see if we can still produce the roof within a short period of time. depends on the weather, obviously, and it won't take them that long to put it up the way it's going to be constructed. I will give you one point of reference here. We put $150,000 in for the roof. I'm going to guesstimate that it's going to come in closer to 200, to which I'm going to have to then scramble to try to find some money for you if possible, for whether it comes out of contingency or somewhere else. And I would offer that first. Let the Board of Finance decide which way they'd like to go with that, whether it be coming out of the monies we have currently or taking money out of the general fund. I would prefer to try to do it myself.
I remember I think you and I talked about this, Kevin, about that we had gotten 30 something back in the auction.
Correct.
In recent time, what was it, 34?
37,000. I don't think if I can add on to that.
Yeah.
We had a department head meeting today. We were going over line item by line item of making sure that anything that looked like it might have been overexpended or would be coming close towards the end of the year, just to make sure that what I'm going to be doing from now on is on a quarterly basis, I'm going to come back to the Board of Finance and do line item transfers in a quarterly fashion versus waiting to the end of the year when it's like trying to figure out all the little transfers back and forth. So I think it's only fair to do that. And noticing that, we recognize the fact that the auction made $37,000. Let's talk a little bit about that, because 4 of the pieces of equipment that were up at the auction were actually Water Pollution Control Authority items. So we have to subtract those numbers from the $37,000, but they're also going to be paying us a prorated portion of the monies for the auctioneer. I think that is pretty much it. Is there anything else, Ron, that we had?
So, yeah, to build off of what First Selectman said, is that the cost for the auctioneer is based on how much we take in. So since we were paying for the cost of the items sold by WPCA, they're going to contribute to the cost based on the percentage of what they took in, just to make it equitable. And there are also other costs associated, like overtime costs from the highway department who worked that day, so they would WPCA would have to contribute to the overtime cost in a percentage base of what they took in, similar to that what they what they're going to contribute based on the area. So those numbers are still being worked out. Yesterday we found out that there were 2 items. Today they said, oh no, there were 2 more. So the details of that are still being ironed out in terms of the exact figures, which will give us the exact number. But I think it's safe to say we cleared over $30,000 from the auction.
And let me add one more thing to that, because the highway department has been cleaning up that area on Highway Garage. In doing so, they've been putting scrap metal off to the side. They brought it over to Winco and got a check back for $1,001. So that'll go into the general fund as well, for if you're considering to help to do the offset for the roof. Okay?
Yeah, I think that keeping that in mind, that we have some unanticipated money that came in, but also, as Kevin said, we can certainly be in communication to find out where else, it could possibly come from. But definitely, again, going back to, I remember the emphasis put on it. I mean, it needs to get done. It can't be delayed. So certainly, we will, I'm sure, be able to approve, some additional funding when needed.
Not to interrupt, but I do want to circle back to a point on the audit that
okay.
I definitely wanted to discuss.
Yeah, let me just,
Sure.
so again, that was our update. Are there any other questions or comments?
Just a quick one.
Yeah.
Who's writing the specs for that job?
Well, Kyle has all the specs written up. We had a couple people go up and inspect it to begin with, including the roofing store. It was his first gentleman to go up and take a look at it to see what the type of material that's up there and what could be available. So he's helped write the specs for Kyle.
Anybody else go up look at it?
He told me there was one other person, but I don't know who it was exactly. You want I can find out for you and get back?
It seems to me you want to tend to maybe have more of a general contractor who does
Right.
Pre-engineered buildings and stuff.
Don't forget, Kyle was, prior to his life here, was also a roofer, so that helps him to understand what about the roofing.
I put him up too.
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions or comments? No? Okay, before moving on to the next item?
Again, I apologize for having us to circle back, but in addition to the items that the audit firm pointed out that needed rehabilitation, they did suggest that we think about hiring a part-time consultant to help speed up the audit process and rectify some of the reconciliations we had over the course of the fiscal year 19, dating back to July of 18. So as of right now, we have 2 consultants that the auditor suggested, one at a higher end, one at a lower end. We haven't met with them yet, but we're looking at one with a potential of $40 an hour and another with a potential of between $120 and $170 an hour. I just needed to put that out. I didn't know we couldn't go through the audit discussion without discussing that, but I think it's important to know that right now, in the time frame that we're working, in the skill set of the staff, that this is a necessary cost for us to incur, and we can move forward and have a deeper, in-depth conversation with the auditor next month. But in the interim, we will communicate with the Board of Finance in terms of whether or not we take on this part-time consultant.
In most towns, how many people they have working in their finance department?
Well, it depends on the size of the team, the size of the budget. You know, I think if you look at Board of Education's budget, I mean, they have $35 million budgets. You know, they've got, I'm assuming?
No, well, not really, just the administrator.
Yeah.
I'm the one.
So, yeah, I mean, it all depends on the skill set of the staff and not necessarily the manpower.
Assuming that consultant recommendation will come up at their formal presentation. Results.
Or would it come up at the, not necessarily the formal
No.
presentation, but would they mention that at the update?
Sure. But I think that it's, you know, there's a possibility that we bring on the consultant before next month's meeting. So, I mean, I guess you're gonna want more of an explanation as to what needs to be done exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I know that's something that, you know, I understand it being a recommendation, but I would say personally not enough information
So here's
to
the
bank on.
thing. The reason the audit firm can't do it or shouldn't do it is because it's a poor accounting practice for the audit firm to fix the problems that they're eventually going to give us a grade on. The other issue is that there should be segregation of duties in the Department of Finance where there's a person who's dedicated to this specific task, which would be reconciling the bank statements, which goes back to what I described earlier, which is the person who is making the journal entries should also be the person who's making the transfers with the bank statement. There has to be a check and balance of duties because we're dealing with money, and there has to be 2 people understanding or working hand in hand to make sure that 1, the number's right, and 2, nobody's stealing. You know, that's the issue, and that's why third party coming in on a part-time basis, not, you know, we're eliminating the need to hire somebody full-time to get this job done, can fix the problem and make sure that going forward we're aware of what needs to be done and staffed properly to make sure it doesn't happen again.
I understand in terms of the accounting process why we need to have a consultant come in, but I guess I'm a little concerned, like the variances between the cost of the 2 different types of consultants we're having come in, between like $40 to like $100 to $120 an hour. That's a big difference, and I guess I'm just concerned like in terms of quality of work and
Discount
so
consulting is unbelievable.
Right.
Well, yeah, it's like anything else, you get what you pay for. Sometimes you may get a little bit more than what you pay for with those types of cost variances.
There just
I
isn't
think,
someone in between that? That's quite a large variance.
I understand. I guess, you know, it all depends on what, $120 an hour versus $40 an hour. The person who's charging $120 an hour is a former finance director of several municipalities. They can come in and probably do the job at half the time. They might even do a little bit more work than what you would ask them for in terms of just managing and trying to button up the internal controls that they would see, just like, you know, a different perspective from an audit firm. You're in budgeting, you understand.
Right, yeah.
But
that's
as far as the $40 an hour, they would more than likely just come in and do one task, which would be reconciling which is time consuming, but it's hard to put a final cost on what the project would require, regardless of the hourly rate, because there's a possibility that the person working $120 at $120 an hour would operate in a quicker, timely fashion.
Well, yeah, I think that's important to know, and I'm glad you were able to explain that to us, because there's definitely a difference in terms of the information, the feedback you get back
Yeah.
if someone was a former director.
Sure. You know, it's, feel free to fire the questions away. Sometimes my explanations might come across as a little vague, and I apologize for that. And I'm not trying to withhold any information. It's just sometimes, like I said, I have to circle back, and I can't, just in the moment, I don't remember. So I apologize for that. But if you have a question, feel free to add, and I'll do my best to answer. That would be the reason for the variance in price.
What would be what's the scope of that position? I know you said part-time, but what would be the anticipated term of employment? This wouldn't be a permanent addition to
No,
staff?
absolutely not. And that's why it's a consultant status here. You wouldn't enjoy union benefits or anything, any type of labor agreement or anything. It would be probably the contract would be on a basis of the completion of the audit. So they would assist in making sure that our trial balances, our bank reconciliations are in line with the audit, in ensuring the audit gets completed. And it's because the auditor cannot do this in addition to myself, based on checks and balances required in the office.
So is this seen as a necessity given limitations of the current staff, or just the practices of the current staff?
The current staff does a great job. It's just, like you said, for a long time, we've been set in our ways and doing it in a certain way. But we're now shifting and moving towards another direction, and that's, it's sometimes getting up to speed with that new direction takes a little bit of time. I think this is part of that process in making sure that the staff is aware of this particular aspect, because it wasn't delegated to them in the past.
Just to piggyback off of what Matt was saying, is this something that we should anticipate on budgeting for next year, that we're possibly going to need consultants again for audit for 2020?
Well, if all goes well with this, I don't anticipate that. I think, this should be a one-time, one-off cost. Like I said, it's like putting a tourniquet on a wound. You make sure you heal and stop the bleeding, and then make sure you're in the right direction, and for a long-term benefit, you fix the problem.
But in terms of checks and balances with having one person input line items?
No, that shouldn't be. No,
I
yeah.
understand that. We already will have something in place for that?
That's the purpose of this, hiring the consultant, to make sure that there's an understanding going forward, that this consultant shows what needs to be done and how to move forward.
Is there room in the finance budget?
No. No.
Oh, we'll cut right to the chase then. They're all that $40 an hour.
Right.
It's pretty good.
Right.
I mean, for that, what budget line would you anticipate that hitting, in all seriousness? Because that's, even if it was $40 or $30 an hour, that's...
Yeah, I think this is an unanticipated cost. And I think that, if there were any place you would have to put it, I think you would put it in contingency, because this seems like a contingency. I don't like working out of the contingency budget. If you were to, the other option would be to put it in the audit line item and recognize that as an unallocated cost and have that line item run over, and just understand that the justification for that over expenditure is the result of an unanticipated cost. And then we can maybe create some line item transfers at the end of the year if there is room for it. What is not recommended is taking money from the fund balance to make sure that this cost is covered. That could affect our credit rating, because we should reserve those types of costs for capital expenditures.
I would like to just for a second recognize our first selectman. I know we've talked about we're talking about contingency quite a bit, especially in recent times. And of course, I know you just mentioned about line item transfers and how we're planning on approaching that in the future. So what are your thoughts about this situation?
All right, let's first talk about what is taken out of contingency that we can't put back in, because so far what was taken out of contingency was $21,495. Of that was the $19,500 for the grant for the annex. We're still anticipating monies to come back from that, half of that, but it can't go back into this line item, it has to go to the general fund. So consider that $21,495 already off limits at this point. What you have left at that point is $28,505. What I'd like to see, what I'd really love to see is an estimated calculation of what the cost would be. So you're saying that we're looking at this hourly rate for X amount of time, and to give an actual number so that the Board of Finance and myself, we can look at this and try to figure out where we can take it out of and be the less hurt out of which line item. So that's what I'd like to do first.
Okay.
Because right now we're just talking about an hourly rate. We're not talking about what the actual number could be. I'd love to see what the number could be.
I think it's also important to point out what Ron had said, that, you know, even though $120, $100 an hour, whatever the figure comes, you said that they could potentially do it in half the time. So I think it's really important to ask each, you know, consultant or firm that you'd be using, you know, how long it would actually take, and kind of go from there.
As part of the interviewing process of whichever person would be picked, it would be prudent to do that, just to say, what we given the numbers and what we have available right now. I mean, they're not going to be able to sit there and dig into it and look at it, but what is the anticipated numbers that you're looking at to come back with for completion time? And then you can cost it out, estimate it wise, and then come back and say, what can we take it out of? Because right now you're going blind on just an hourly rate only.
Right, and that's why I said in the beginning, I don't know that I would be comfortable in really taking this much further, because of, I think we should have gotten probably a little more information out to the members.
Well, here's,
Excuse me, could you, if I can direct
Yeah.
would it be something we could table for getting more data and you asking for more information from the Board of Finance members to say, what are you looking for? Because I can hear already, you'd like to get more detail before you make any action whatsoever. So can we table that and then discuss it offline to get more detail and then bring it back to a special meeting?
I mean, we could, I mean, I don't see why that's not a bad idea. I was gonna say that if you anticipate the audit to be completed by February, the end of February, we would leave this person around for about a month. And from that start date to the end, I mean, if you're looking at $40 an hour at, say, 20 hours a week, you're looking at, $3,000 a month. So I would say at the most, the cost for this particular person at $40 an hour would be no more than $5,000 for this consultant.
And being the person who's going to have to take it out of a line item, I want to see the numbers on paper.
No argument there, I totally understand, but I mean, I'm just, just to give you a ballpark understanding and create a perspective that we're working off of, and just to eliminate any uncertainty going forward, that's exactly around the number that we should be working with.
Hourly numbers that we've been talking about are extremely preliminary, so
Yes.
yeah, we definitely need more information.
We were discussing the possibility of a special meeting in January.
Right,
Start this meeting.
right, because there was another item I remember talking about. Kevin was trying to remember there was another item that we were going to put on a special meeting agenda besides the audit. I'm drawing a blank, of course, but anyways, yeah, we are going to have a special meeting in January, so putting that on it would not be an issue in early January.
I'm assuming this would still be subject to a hiring process.
Absolutely.
It's not something that would be fast-tracked within a week or
No,
anything
no,
like that, so-
but time is of the essence. I mean,
Yeah.
I just, I'm not saying that, this isn't something that should be rushed, but it is something that should be vetted.
So would we essentially be using an agency to find someone for us rather quickly? Like,
No, we have a couple of recommendations. This isn't a procurement process necessary because it's below the small purchase threshold, but, we're trying to figure out exactly who works best for us. Right now, we have two candidates, and we can interview them, see how they fit.
All right, so yeah, I would be fine with doing that. I mean, it's not, I didn't put this on the agenda as an official item to.
No, but I
to
believe
do.
Ron mentioned it as an addendum on the, inclusive to update on the audit.
Yes.
So,
So,
so it's really a tableable item.
right, because I mean, we weren't gonna be taking action on this, again, in accordance with the agenda, so, but again, I support the idea of, can we get some more information, and obviously I'll be in contact with you on that, making sure the members have that information, and then I would be fine with scheduling a special meeting, for early January to address.
That's fine, that's great.
Yeah, okay. All right, so with that said, moving on to item D, discuss and act on the 2020 regular meeting schedule. Everybody should have a copy of that. This is where if any of the members, you certainly look at the dates are very standard, but this is also where annually we sometimes would discuss the timing of the meeting. I know in the past we've had discussions on when the meeting should start. I still stand firmly like when I first started on the board, which is I like 6:30 because our meetings can sometimes run long, so I like getting started a little earlier than what many other town meetings get started at, which is 7. And I know for many years the Board of Finance did start at 7. And then also personally for me, and I think other members might agree, is that 6 o'clock can be cutting it sometimes close for those of us who work business schedules during the day. It can be sometimes hard to make a 6 o'clock meeting, but 6:30, I know for me personally is very doable. But again, looking at this, we do need to formally approve it, and of course could amend it if need be.
I'll move that we adopt the 2020 monthly meeting schedule as drafted.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to adopt the 2020 monthly meeting schedule. A second, any other discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. All right, moving on to item E. So this is based on what we've done in the past for a budget schedule, as far as the start time on it and that order in which we would usually do things. Now again, it could be subject to change, if we see fit. We could certainly, we could add something, we could, move something if we wanted to have something later on. Personally, I look at it as it's one of those things, I don't think it was broken in the past, so I don't know that we need to fix it. I think the process that we followed in the past as far as when we get started with our meetings on the budget, the presentations, the department heads, obviously giving plenty of time with the Board of Education. The one thing that I know we have added in the past, but it's one of those you can't anticipate it or don't know when exactly it would fall, is we have had a joint meeting before of the Board of Selectmen, the Board of Finance, and the Board of Ed, which I'm always very open to because I think getting us all together during the budget season can be very helpful sometimes as opposed to just hearing from one boards individually at separate meetings talking about pretty much the same thing, which is how are we going to balance the budget and propose it to the taxpayers. So that's one of those that again we're open to, but you got to remember too that during the budget season there's some meetings like special meetings that we have to schedule just based on our time frame and the results and going forward. So that's something to plan for, and I just encourage the members to remember that although this is the meeting schedule that we want to go on as an outline, it can of course get increasingly filled with more meetings as the season goes on.
One thing I would throw out there is February 1st, that is a Saturday, I believe it's obviously the first Saturday
Oh, yes.
of February, the Board of Ed's budget workshop.
Yes.
I believe this year they're holding it in a different venue. In the past, they've held it at the ECC building.
Ron, where is it?
Plainfield Central.
Holding at Plainfield Central, and obviously, we're the Board of Finance, but the school budget is multiples the size of the town. Might be a good idea to have a healthy attendance at that workshop. Having attended it multiple times in the past, there is a lot of information and a lot of discussion into supporting the budgets and explaining many of the line items.
Is that Saturday, February?
Yes.
What time?
Well, I believe it starts at 8:30 and goes to 11:30 or 12.
yeah, I personally am for that. I've attended those in the past as well, and I did find it helpful to starting off that early. I mean, already should be looking at, and what's nice about it is not only to be looking at the Board of Education budget that early on, but having all the administrators in the room to give their presentations, and really dissecting school by school. I mean, what are the increases, and why exactly are you asking for additional, levels of income for whatever, and it's, I remember some questions being directed, like when it came to facilities, of why do you need to up maintenance, or why hasn't this been addressed, and it started engaging in long-term conversations, a big one being like HVAC, and heating systems, and some of the deficiencies there, so I remember that being very productive discussions. I personally enjoyed having, especially having all the administrators there, and Ken and Ron, so I would definitely encourage Board of Finance members to attend that date, if they can. And I would certainly be for amending the schedule to add that.
I guess, would that take a motion? This isn't to necessarily adopt, but I'll move to amend the Board of Finance meeting schedule for fiscal year 21 budget to include the Plainfield Board of Education budget workshop dated February 1st, 2020.
A second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to adopt the meeting schedule with the exception of amending and adding the budget workshop for the Board of Education to the schedule. Any other discussion? Hearing none, all the, yep.
I don't think that was his motion.
Opposed.
My motion was to amend the proposed Board of Finance meeting schedule for fiscal 21 to include
Yes,
the Board of Ed workshop,
yes.
not the schedule in its entirety.
Sorry, yes. To add that, yes. Sorry, I stand corrected.
Would you consider that a Board of Finance meeting? We are looking at a Board of Finance meeting schedule, right?
That is true.
Would you consider a Board of Ed meeting, a Board of Finance meeting?
For this purpose, I would.
I would consider it,
For the
Ted, the
reasons-
same reason like we note certain dates on here that are not actually a meeting, but they are a due date, or a date that pertains to the budget.
Are we looking at the Board of Finance schedule?
The budget schedule.
Oh, okay, I thought you said Board of Finance, sorry.
Yeah, budget.
Oh, budget, sorry.
Yeah,
Meeting schedule for the fiscal 21
the
budget.
budget, yeah. Okay, so there is a motion on the floor. Was there any other discussion besides what we just had? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries.
I'll motion that we accept the amended schedule.
I'll second it.
All right, any other discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries. All right, and with that said, moving on to reviewing the current fiscal year 19-20 budget statement. Ron, any particular updates you'd like to note?
One item in particular was, it's not reflected on this budget statement, but it's in terms of what the overall presentation of the budget is going to look like next month when we reflect on the December's numbers because of the purchase of the automobile that we made last month, we approved. These numbers reflect through the end of November. We purchased the vehicle sometime last week. So the purchase of the vehicle, as of right now, is going to go under vehicles expense for the building inspector. That's going to run over that particular line item by a significant amount, like $20,000. But we wanted to make sure that you were aware going forward that you have the consideration or the power to amend the budget to create a specific line item for that cost. It's an unanticipated cost. It's a new line item that would be created that would keep the vehicle expense within the building inspector down, and it would also create a capital expenditure under general town that we use our fund balance to pay for. So that is what we recommend. We wanted to give you full disclosure on that to let you know that the budget can't be amended without, however, adding a new line item can't be done without the Board of Finance's approval. So that's how we should probably proceed going forward. And I think it's just a good practice for the new members on the Board of Finance to understand that that's the procedure that we should use going forward. It was a good thing that we got funding for the car. We purchased the car, the vehicle's there. But right now, it's sitting in a line item because we have to allocate the cost. It's sitting in a line item that we could keep it in if we want to recognize the over expenditure, but in the past, they've created line items for it, and that's probably the best practice going forward.
And that's detailing the practice going forward.
Correct, yeah.
That's how that'll be stipulated on next month's report.
Yes.
For December.
Yeah, well, depending on what you decide as of right now, you can decide on whether or not to create that extra line item and make sure the cost is allocated there. You can leave it under vehicle expense and then discuss it next month on how it should be properly allocated. But that's definitely up to you and to your discretion. But that's been a topic of discussion throughout town hall over the last week, and I just wanted to make sure that that's addressed. As for the rest of the budget, again, if you feel like asking me any more questions about that, feel free to let me know. I'm just going to move on to some of the traditional items that are running over. Again, we had our budget meeting this morning with the department heads. Legal notices under the selectman's office. That's an issue that we're trying to rein in. It's definitely going to run over this year. We've spent roughly $3,300 more than we did at this point in time last year, which is a significant increase given that only $7,500 has been appropriated this year. So we're almost at capacity. Different supplies and expenses within certain departments have been criticized. One thing you should know that we did is that we switched from WB Mason to utilize Amazon and try and initiate some cost savings by using cheaper sourcing methods like Amazon. WB Mason was really they were overcharging us for a lot, and they would charge us for delivery. Everybody knows how efficient Amazon can be. So in terms of supplies and expenses, what you can get off of Amazon, we do going forward instead of getting those overcharges from WB Mason. Some of the variances you'll notice throughout the salaries, again, it's because of the additional pay period in November, same as last month. That if you need me to describe that a little bit more, I'd be happy to. We're running a decent budget. You could project all you want, and some run over, some run short, but a lot of the overages right now are due to earlier fiscal year costs, upfront costs that aren't anticipated later on in the fiscal year.
Quick question on purchase services for the Northeast Transit District, $12,486.
What page are you in?
Page 5. Yes.
What's that for?
Kevin.
Yes.
Sure. That was money that was allocated for the transportation with NECOG. Normally, a full year cycle would be about $33,000, so we knew we'd have to anticipate more monies from another line item if we were going to go for the full year. But as of right now, it's still in hold because Griswold wants to have a flyer sent out to its ridership because they're losing 4 stops. And in doing so, they had some concerns, but I believe SEAT has tried to eliminate those issues because they're trying to work with them to actually still continue picking up those 4 stops, but not as on a regular basis. It's still picking them up.
So you're going to deal with Seat versus Northeast?
Well, yeah, because the bottom line was how they wanted to put it together. The state of Connecticut Transportation Department said they wanted this to happen. So they're encouraging SEAT to put the link in so we can go all the way up and down this road. So the numbers that they were given before were actually very, very good numbers. They were about 20,000 instead of the 33. But now that it's taking a little longer, I'm gonna anticipate that it's probably gonna be even less than that, probably about 16 or 17,000. By the time if we start up, it'll probably be in February. And it would be something, we wouldn't have that much money to really ask to move over from a line item. But that's what it was from.
Does
12,000
Northeast come down to Plainfield? I don't know.
Pardon?
Does Northeast come down to
They
Plainfield?
don't come to Plainfield at all. This is the one reason why the state of Connecticut Transportation wants to make sure this happens. The offer was to put it all the way up and down the east corridor
We appropriate that money how long ago?
every single year, but the problem is, the state of Connecticut, the transportation department continues to drag, pull back, not want to do it. By the time they get it all finalized and say it's okay, it's too late. So that's why if you take a look at that number for the last 4 years, same number. If I come to you with a budget next year, it would be, once we start it up, it would be with the full amount. But that's what it was already allocated as, so.
I mean, that would be for your consultant in the finance department. Are we doing a revaluation too?
No,
Well, you got 32 grand for your roof.
no,
too.
but that is, okay. Explain what reval is. Reval is done through NECOG. And what we do is we pay a fair proportionate price out for X amount of years. And we're not due again until 2021.
Yeah, and I was gonna ask you that, Kevin, as far as planning ahead to the upcoming budget. We said around like 33,
Yes,
that's probably what would be
yes.
proposed.
One other thing was 20 grand for the police car. 20,465 right now, capital expense.
Yep.
Not purchased yet, or whatever that was for.
Funds have not been exchanged yet, so I think we're still in the process of finalizing those details. So that will be December, reflected in December's budget.
And on page 6, the highway computer and Wi-Fi.
That is in the process of being put together. We had a discussion on that this morning in terms of training that we're instituting. We had a sexual harassment training that needed to be taken care of, or administered online for insurance purposes, and we understand that the highway department can't take part in that because they don't have a computer, and it's in the works. We're in the process of getting it put away, as we are with the rest of town hall. Computer purchases. Yep.
You talking about the $5,000 line item?
Yeah, 5,000.
Yeah, that was, Kyle didn't even know about that. So I pointed that out to him the other day, that there's a $5,000 availability because he's run out of computers already. But there is that line in there for $5,000 for computer and Wi-Fi. So he is going to be able to access that to put a computer and Wi-Fi up there for them.
That timeline.
Better fix the roof before it gets wet.
That timeline for the training isn't gonna elapse until it takes to get the computer set up.
No, that was another topic of discussion. We've got a year to institute these annual trainings, so you have to have one sexual harassment training for you.
There's State Bill 1111 that requires all employees to have anything over 50 people in a business is required to have that training online. And we decided to use the inexpensive method, going through PERMA, it won't cost us anything to online training.
Most municipalities use online training. It's a bit more time effective as opposed to getting everybody out of their office at once to sit in an auditorium to have someone speak and give a conference. You can sit in front of the screen, make sure you have time on your own over the course of a certain period of time to get that done. So it's the standard practice for most municipalities, most organizations in general.
You say the highway department's not going to have computers?
This is correct. You're gonna get it.
I see and Wi-Fi in there, so is there internet access to be had there as well? So this is inclusive of both the computer and internet connection setup? Other than the training, I mean, do we have other uses that they'd be using the computer for?
Email would be great.
Yes. When you're searching for parts for different vehicles that have maybe broken down or different things they needed at the highway department, that's why the use of Wi-Fi.
What line would the Wi-Fi go under in the future budgets?
It would most likely be under computer for the town.
Oh, for the town?
I would trust you guys are just expanding the current arrangement of service.
Yeah, yeah. And the computers would be a one-time purchase, hardware would be a one-time purchase.
My only additional request would it be possible to get these reports sooner
Yes,
than the day of?
you should have received it Monday.
The full.
Oh, I believe it was sent out Monday night.
You're saying that this should have been sent electronically when you sent it?
This, yeah, could have been sent electronically, the whole statement here. I received.
You received it in separate, FY9, November and year-to-date?
The only one I got was the revenue.
This is what I received.
There were two.
I did get them all.
Yeah, there were several different.
So what happens is,
That's the only one
what happens is that the files tend to be too big to send them together, so I sent them in subsequent emails, which I think
I got. That was a
Travis,
series of 3.
yeah. So,
I received one of 3. So we'll just work on fixing that for next time.
Another option I know Don has told me he's done before is just, if it works within one's schedule, just come down and get a copy.
yeah, Don usually just
Stop at the finance office and get a copy, obviously, days leading prior to the board finance meeting.
Potentially how early before.
the goal would be to get it to you the Thursday before. That was my intention this month, but the standard is no later than the Monday prior, but I'd like to get that pushed up to Thursday to give you time over the weekend to look at it. Sometimes it doesn't work out that way. But like everything else, it's a work in progress.
I was just wondering if we were interested in having to pick it up, how would we do it?
Yeah, I would say the goal would be for next month to have it by the Thursday before.
And we couldn't pick it up on Friday.
Well, that's
Town hall was closed.
Unless I can,
So it could be Thursday.
I can load out, I will most likely email it to you on Thursday night as well, so if you had to pick it up.
That would help save on paper too.
All you gotta do is have them delivered to the recreation department, that's open
That's true.
You can deliver it to the recreation.
on Fridays.
I don't want courier costs to show up anywhere.
That's in here, public servant, we could do it.
Leave a copy with me, I'm here on Fridays.
All right. So there you go. All right, any other comments or questions about the budget statement? No? Okay. Moving on to the added item, G, to discuss and act upon a proposal to have Realtor given permission to promote and sell remaining iPark lots. I'd like to recognize our first selectman to just elaborate a little bit more on that.
I do apologize for the late entry for that. It was something we just brought up. In years past, we've had discussed this particular item about having a realtor go ahead and see if we can promote the remaining 4 sites that are up in the I-lot. And to do so, it would require going through the Board of Finance, because if you take a look in the charter, it mentions the fact that, we're touching money here, because we're paying somebody a commission out of that fee. So it's an idea, again, just came to me, someone brought it to my attention, so I wanted to know if you would entertain discussion on it and then possibly act. This is something that, whatever the commission, I think is somewhere up to 6%, we would actually have to put it out to a bid to let people know it's available to do. And then whoever came in to take that would again get their commission off of it based on what we agree upon as the best opportunity. I mean, we only have, I think it's just 4 left, so and those are some of the difficult lots, and I think having somebody else do it for us, we can promote it online, we can talk about it in the newspaper, we can put it in newsprint, but we've done that already, and we haven't gotten too far. So I just entertain that thought if you want to discuss it. I'm open to whatever you'd like to do.
All right, thank you, Kevin.
How long have we had those lots?
Since it opened,
Well,
yeah.
time to move.
And you would know, what do you think it's like late 70s, early 80s when we actually instituted the iPark?
Yep.
Yeah.
I remember looking at some old literature saying that at one point there might be a grand theater that would go somewhere in that area. I was looking at an arrow shot saying
Okay.
that was somebody's idea at one point.
I started off with a couple of incubator buildings.
Yeah, never happened.
Yeah, they did.
No, I meant some of the ideas that had been put out there at one point, like a theater.
What's the current commission?
6,
6?
but they can work on that.
Right, yeah.
They bid it out and see.
Would that probably maybe come out of the marking line item?
Yes. Doesn't cost that much for putting it out to bid. This is the advertising portion of it.
Yeah.
Okay, any other thoughts, questions by the members?
Just for my benefit, can we just restate what exactly we would be acting on? We'd be acting to put out to bid for the 4 remaining lots
And sell.
And so,
and sell?
yeah.
And they basically sell. The Board of Finance has to approve the sale.
I'm just naive on the process. Is there any initial outlay? Is there a cost to list or, I mean, I haven't bought or sold property in quite a while.
That's a good point.
Some of that would be come out of the marketing.
Anything would be coming out of marketing. Most of it will be the advertising. The last time I put an advertisement out for an open position, it was about $600. So the rest of it, again, would be based on what we put out for the ad and how we would word the who got what. But really, most of that comes out of them. They're really wanting to sell it because they want to get permission, so.
Yeah, so the initial, we're talking the initial outlay of money from the town is to go through the bid process.
Yes.
To select somebody to sell the property.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And seeing as though we haven't really addressed this issue, I again apologize because it's so late to bring it forward. I have no problem with actually having you table it, and I can bring it back with more detail next meeting.
I'm all for going ahead with it. We got enough information.
What additional information could be brought? That would differ from what we have now.
Nothing much, really.
Is there a move on?
Yeah.
I guess just in terms of like the potential selling price of the properties, to kind of figure out a ballpark, like what are,
We usually go with fair market value of what the property's worth. Some have portions of wetland on it, so I would look that up for you, but I'm gonna guess, boy, 30,000, 40,000 for some, because they're smaller lots, and if they do encroach on wetland area, so.
and they're storing them? How many? 4? You said?
4 left, I think.
Okay.
Really, the only fee that real estate firm gets is whatever the
The
commission is.
commission, which we can negotiate,
Mhm.
necessarily have to do.
We verified licensing, verified all of that information first.
Okay, so with that said, is there a motion?
I'll make the motion to sell the lots, whether it be with a broker or not.
I'll stop.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Kevin, does that sound sufficient to you?
It's fine.
Okay.
Are we comfortable with that stipulation, with or without a broker?
Again,
I'm very
This-
comfortable.
Oh, I assume.
I
See, that end of the table might
The
be.
issue is more, we
If-
would need a broker.
If we
Right.
for
If the sale
discretion.
happens before we contract a realtor, then that would be fine. So that's the only basic caveat I would say would be, if it sells before we entertain and hire a realtor, then we do it that way. Once we go with the realtor, it's up to them to make the
But
sale.
even if you go to a realtor, you don't have to give them an exclusive, that's up to you.
Right, it
We
depends
we have to
on.
revisit
You could
that.
still-
That would be part of the,
Whatever you feel you wanna do with it, that's why I
we
left
would
it.
put it
open.
out in 6-month chunks or 1-year chunks and then go forward. That's how you usually do it with your house, right?
Mhm.
That is-
Yeah, and then there's different types of agreements.
Yeah.
You know, if the seller procures, you know, a buyer for it, you don't necessarily have to pay a commission. It depends, like, what
Depending
type
upon-
of agreement
Right.
you have. So that's something to look into too.
I guess the way Ted stated it, I mean, that doesn't discount if somebody walks into Kevin's office tomorrow and throws money down on the
Right.
table that he can't sell it. so.
Who knows, it's Christmas.
Right.
It was expected.
Yeah.
Yep. And if there's no other discussion, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Kevin, thank you for the information. All right, and moving on to citizens' participation, I open the floor.
I think as a reminder, you were thinking about a special meeting in January. Could it have been, we discussed talking about me coming back to you with the line item transfers as one of those items?
Yes, so yeah, that is, yes. Now thinking back to it, so what we talked about is, this is a segue into, I was gonna make a comment that the January meeting is a regular meeting on the date that we just approved on the calendar, but it's actually at the police station, because as a courtesy and talking to Chief Supernaut, he extended an invitation that, because we have new members of the Board of Finance, not all members here have necessarily gotten a full tour of the police station. And I personally, when I first got on the Board of Finance, I supported that because having never gotten a full tour of it, it really opened up, one's eyes to see, the conditions, the situations they're dealing with there, and hence why they would increase certain levels of funding in the budget, certain things they would ask for, and basically it's open-ended of like, we don't need to wait till the department head meeting to ask some of the in-depth questions of the police station. So I almost look at it as it's kind of a good idea of getting a jump start on the police stations. He'll answer questions, related to the budget, but again, most importantly, take the members around the station to see firsthand what they're working with there. So that'll be the bulk of the regular meeting. It gets treated as a regular meeting, but it does involve going into executive session for security purposes and safety. So that just needs to be taken into consideration. So for that meeting, because that's going to be the prime item at the meeting, I'm not looking to add a lot of miscellaneous items to that agenda, which means that if we do have any kind of time-sensitive things or anything else we might want to act upon, that would warrant a special meeting. I'd be prepared to have separately from it. So that's where what Kevin was just talking about. I'd be willing to have a special meeting for line item transfers, and then, as we discussed too, to further talk about consulting. Okay. Any other citizens' participation? No, seeing none, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
We adjourn.
Okay, a motion, is there a second? Second. Okay, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned. Happy holidays, everyone.